So I saw this in, actually a friend posted this on Facebook, and it says Asian Americans call on the church to preach against coronavirus racism.
This was in Christianity Today.
Christianity Today. And there was some back and forth on the thing, and I was like, okay, but what is the bigger, issue?
So what's going on here?
Like, that's what I was.
What's the connection between racism and coronavirus?
Well, because the epicenter, and place where it started was in Wuhan, China.
Okay, right.
A lot of Chinese Americans, Chinese immigrants are experiencing discrimination or racism around the world. And so there's been a call from Chinese Christians to have people speak out against racism against the Chinese in their churches.
So because it originated in China, Chinese people now are experiencing some
discrimination. It's like they've been.
What does that look like practically?
There in Texas, a family was stabbed.
Okay.
Including like a 2-year-old, a mother, and I want to say there was another person in the family that was stabbed. In London, there's been Chinese people who've been like beat up and spat on and all that. In Paris, there was issues. Paris has like this new hashtag now. In the English translation is "We are not the virus." So whatever happened in France became so bad or so stigmatized that the Chinese there, and it's not just Chinese, it's people who are of any Asian region, because people are, getting confused. Like, I don't know, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, like Asian Americans are, at least here anyway, experiencing more discrimination and assault. And so
in these news stories, the stabbing, this sort of thing, is the thought train that they're going to attack Chinese people or Asian people
because they're responsible for the virus.
Okay.
There's fear. We don't want you to give it to us. I saw on Twitter this lady, and of course it was Walmart, but this lady in Walmart, and she was just yelling at this one elderly Chinese woman who was just in there looking at things on the shelf, and, telling her she shouldn't touch those things. And, she's now...
Because she might have the Rona.
Okay. And, she's now the reason why things are being contaminated and all of that. And so with all of this...
This is really sad.
It's really sad. But, I mean, it also doesn't help when you hear things like the Chinese virus. That's a form of discrimination. It's when we are now lining people up to be demeaned based on something that we attribute to their ethnicity. So I was really intrigued by this article just because of the whole racism aspect and considering how we as Christians should treat people and should, honor their dignity, value, and worth.
Right, because all humans being created in the image of God, we see them as having equal dignity and equal value. So this idea of, what we call in modern terms xenophobia, this prejudice against
people from other countries,
certain people. The idea of that is like, hey, Christians need to be a vocal advocate against that demeaning behavior.
Yeah. How do we treat others? And when we look at, the scriptures, the first thing that we talked about was, treating other people how we want to be treated.
Yes.
We wouldn't want some disease to be associated with our ethnicity. 1, 2, viruses aren't ethnicity specific, so they're
equal opportunity
opportunity offenders,
yeah.
And it reminds me of, and Emily and I had a conversation about this, of like shortly after 9/11, you saw things like Arabs or Muslims, they were all terrorists.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s, Haitians were deemed with like the HIV. That whole HIV epidemic, and
they were seen as the source
of that. And so a lot of Haitians were targeted. there's
being Haitian yourself,
being Haitian myself,
a little area of sensitivity.
And so I just began to wonder, what is the Christian's responsibility in all of this? And one of the things that, like I just said, is like treating others how we want to be treated. But it also made me think about Elisha and when he was mourning for Elijah, and he had a bald head, and the kids made fun of him. And I am not the theologian, so
it's a fairly obscure story in Second Kings. Yes,
but the kids were making fun of him about his bald head, and the bears came and ate them kids. I mean, they tore them apart. I'm like, hey, okay. But for me, what I correlated that to was that there was some sort of mockery, some sort of demeaning, like position in their heart against a physical characteristic of this person. And when I look at like how people can demean others based on their physical characteristics. So I don't know necessarily, or people don't know necessarily, if this person is Chinese, or if they are, a Chinese American. Maybe they've never been to China before in their lives, but because of certain physical characteristics, they are now acting in ways that are derogatory and demeaning and discriminatory.
Yeah. So in the example of Elisha, is kind of an extreme situation where God sent judgment almost through the bears for them mocking verbally of God's prophet. It reminds me too of the words in the book of James, where it talks about how we shouldn't pronounce curses over one another because we're created in the image of God. It's in the section on the tongue, the teaching on the tongue, that out of our mouth comes praises to God, but out of our mouth also comes cursings toward our fellow humans. Such things ought not be, is what the apostle says. So,
and I think the last thing that it makes me think of is the issue of partiality.
Okay.
Like we don't treat people from other areas or people in general differently because a virus was there or because they look a certain way. Like we don't discriminate. We don't show partiality based on anything. Like you have the in Adam and the in Christ, and there's differences there. But as Christians, our call is to honor the dignity, value, and worth of people because they are created in God's image. And so if we're speaking curses over them, or if we are speaking in demeaning and derogatory ways over people,
or mocking them,
or what's it called? Scoffing. Like those are things that as Christians, we should not be doing.
So it makes me think about practically, like, how does this all work? It makes me think about being careful about words that we use, maybe memes that we repost, because people are always watching us, and so we want to think about what we're saying and understanding, not tying the virus to a particular ethnic group per se. We're already getting some comments on your things. Our friend Amy says, I have a Korean friend who's amazingly wounded by this exact issue. I've invited her to your info meeting this Sunday, and I hope she attends. Yay. She said she would be there. So let's talk about that.
Yes.
So should we go into that? And our friend Jeremy says there's a Chinese American YouTube channel that suggests calling it the CCP virus for Chinese Communist Party virus. That's kind of the very thing that you're talking about.
Yeah, because like I said, viruses aren't ethnicity specific, and now if we want to talk about what the Chinese government did, okay, fine. Like that's a conversation. Right. It's not a conversation I choose to have, but if you want to have that conversation, you go right ahead.
Sure.
But what the actions of the government do not represent all of the people who may be Chinese all over the globe.
Right.
And that's what's happening. We are associating a virus with a people group all over the globe, and now that is resulting in discriminatory actions toward a people group. And as Christians, in my opinion, we can use our voice to step into that space and say, no, that's not how we treat people.
That's good.
Every voice.